Late one stormy night, Jake Bennett was driving through the barren roads of Nevada when he spotted something that defied reason: a UFO hovering silently above a deserted gas station. Its glowing, metallic hull cast an eerie light over the pumps, and the air around it seemed unnaturally still. Compelled by a mix of fear and curiosity, Jake pulled over. But as he approached, the station's lights flickered, and something emerged from the shadows. Something that would change his life forever. Jake Bennett had always been a practical man. A long-haul truck driver with over a decade of experience, he had spent countless nights alone on desolate highways. His only companions the dim glow of his truck's dashboard and the occasional static-filled broadcast from an AM radio station. Skepticism had become second nature to him. Stories of ghosts, cryptids, or UFOs were nothing more than drunken ramblings shared by exhausted truckers at late-night diners. But that night, as Jake drove through the barren landscape of Nevada, he encountered something no rational explanation could dismiss. It was a stormy night. The rain pounded relentlessly against his windshield and the wipers struggled to keep up. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the vast emptiness that stretched for miles on either side of the highway. The road ahead was empty, save for a flickering light in the distance. As he drew closer, Jake realized it was an old, isolated gas station, its neon sign barely clinging to life. He glanced at his fuel gauge. It was hovering dangerously close to empty. "Guess it's my lucky day," he muttered to himself, though he couldn't shake the eerie feeling that had been creeping over him since the storm began. As he pulled into the station, he noticed something unusual. Above the station, a faint glow pierced through the thick storm clouds. It wasn't the glow of lightning or a star. It was constant, pulsating, and unnatural. Jake parked his truck near one of the pumps and stepped out, the rain immediately soaking through his jacket. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead mixed with the distant rumble of thunder, but as he looked up, the world seemed to fall silent. His eyes locked onto the source of the glow, a metallic disc-shaped object hovering effortlessly above the gas station. It wasn't large, perhaps the size of a small bus, but its presence was overwhelming. The craft's surface shimmered with an otherworldly light, almost as if it were alive. For a moment, Jake froze. His heart pounded in his chest and every instinct screamed at him to get back in his truck and drive away. But curiosity, a trait that had always gotten him into trouble, kept him rooted to the spot. Slowly, he reached for his phone intending to capture the sight, but as he raised it, the screen went black. "What the hell?" he muttered, tapping the power button to no avail. The gas station's flickering lights suddenly went out, plunging the area into darkness. Only the glow of the UFO remained, casting eerie shadows on the wet asphalt. Jake felt a strange sensation in the air, as if the very atmosphere around him had thickened. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end, and a low, vibrating hum filled his ears. He wasn't alone. From the corner of his eye, Jake noticed movement inside the gas station's convenience store. The faint outline of a figure stood silhouetted against the shelves, illuminated by the UFO's light. Jake's breath hitched as the figure stepped into view. A man dressed in an immaculate black suit, his face pale and expressionless. The man's eyes were cold, almost inhuman, and they locked onto Jake with an intensity that sent chills down his spine. "You saw it too," the man said, his voice calm yet devoid of emotion. Jake opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, metallic object. It was no bigger than a coin, smooth and featureless, yet it seemed to emit a faint warmth even in the pouring rain. The man extended it toward Jake. "Take it," the man said, his tone more commanding now. Jake hesitated, every fiber of his being screaming that this was wrong, but his hand moved on its own, reaching out and taking the object. The moment it touched his palm, a jolt of electricity shot through his arm, and the humming sound around him grew louder. Before Jake could ask who the man was or what the object was for, the stranger turned and walked back into the shadows of the store. "Wait!" Jake called out, but the man didn't stop. Instead, he seemed to vanish into thin air, as if the darkness had swallowed him whole. Jake's head was spinning. He clutched the metallic object tightly, its warmth seeping into his skin. The UFO above the station began to move, ascending higher into the sky. The glow intensified, and for a brief moment the entire area was bathed in blinding white light. Jake shielded his eyes, and when he looked again, the craft was gone. The gas station's lights flickered back on, and the rain seemed to ease, as if the storm had never been there. Shaking, Jake climbed back into his truck. The metallic object sat on the dashboard, unmoving but still warm. As he started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, his mind raced with questions. What had he just witnessed? Who was the man in the suit? And what was this strange object now in his possession? The road stretched endlessly before him, but Jake knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same. The hours that followed felt like a fever dream. Jake couldn't shake the image of the UFO, the pale man in the suit, and the metallic object now sitting on his truck's dashboard. The storm had dissipated, leaving behind an unsettling stillness. The rain-soaked road stretched endlessly ahead, illuminated by the dim glow of his headlights. Everything felt wrong. Jake tried to focus on driving, but his mind kept drifting back to the strange man. Who was he? And why had he given Jake that object? As questions swirled in his head, paranoia crept in. He glanced at his rearview mirror, half expecting to see the black-suited man. But the road behind him was empty, just as it had been for miles. The metallic object, smooth and featureless, seemed to mock him with its silence. It had stopped glowing but remained unnaturally warm to the touch. Jake picked it up, turning it over as if it might reveal some hidden clue. "What the hell are you?" he muttered, breaking the oppressive silence. Suddenly, the object reacted. A faint vibration pulsed through it, sending a jolt of energy up Jake's arm. Startled, he nearly swerved off the road. "Damn it!" he shouted, tossing the object onto the dashboard. The vibrations ceased as quickly as they had started. Jake pulled over to the side of the road, his heart racing. Stepping out of the truck, he was greeted by the cool night air and the hum of crickets. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, their light sharp against the black sky. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands, the smoke calming his nerves. But as he stared up, he noticed a faint, blinking light moving erratically across the sky. His stomach churned. They were watching him. Jake climbed back into his truck, the object on the dashboard seeming to radiate a subtle hum. He felt an irrational urge to throw it out the window, but something stopped him. It wasn't just fear. It was a strange sense of responsibility, as though the object was meant for him and no one else. As he started the truck and pulled back onto the highway, his CB radio crackled to life. Static filled the cab, followed by a distorted voice. "Jake Bennett," it said, barely audible over the interference. Jake's blood ran cold. Who is this?" he stammered. The voice didn't answer directly. Instead, it spoke in a cryptic tone, the words sending chills down his spine. "You have been chosen. Protect the key. They are coming." Before Jake could respond, the radio went silent. He stared at it, his mind racing. The voice had known his name. How? And what did it mean by, "They are coming"? The silence was broken by an approaching vehicle. In his side mirror, Jake saw headlights growing brighter with alarming speed. A black SUV roared forward, closing the gap. Jake's heart pounded as he realized it wasn't passing him. It was chasing him. "Hell no," Jake muttered, slamming his foot on the gas. His truck roared in protest, the old engine struggling. The SUV stayed on his tail, its high beams blinding him. Jake swerved, trying to shake it, but the SUV matched his every move with unnerving precision. Panic set in. His eyes darted to the metallic object on the dashboard. "What do you want from me?" he yelled. As if in response, it began to glow again, its hum growing louder. The light intensified, filling the cab with an otherworldly brilliance. Jake's vision blurred, and a deafening sound filled his ears. a high-pitched whine that seemed to come from everywhere. The truck's engine sputtered and died, the headlights flickering out. Darkness consumed him, the SUV's beams the only light. He braced for impact, but it never came. When Jake opened his eyes, he was no longer on the highway. The truck was parked in a desolate field, tall grass swaying in the night breeze. The metallic object sat on the dashboard, its glow fading. Jake's hands trembled as he gripped the wheel, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. He stepped out, boots sinking into the soft earth. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, broken only by the distant howl of wind. Jake looked around, but there was no sign of the SUV, or the road he had been driving on. It was as if he had been plucked from one reality and dropped into another. The field stretched endlessly, illuminated by the faint light of the stars. Jake's truck, now an island in an unfamiliar sea, felt like his only tether to sanity. He leaned against it, his breathing ragged. "What the hell is going on?" he whispered. The object vibrated again, drawing his attention. He climbed in and picked it up, its warmth oddly comforting now. As he held it, a voice echoed in his mind, not from the radio, but directly in his thoughts. "The key is safe. They cannot follow here." Jake's grip tightened. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice shaking. There was no answer, only silence. But Jake knew one thing for certain. He was no longer in control of his fate. Something far greater than himself had taken the wheel, and there was no turning back. Jake had no idea how long he stood there, staring into the dark field. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the tall grass. The metallic object in his hand no longer glowed or hummed. It was cold now, lifeless. But Jake knew better. This thing, whatever it was, had brought him here. And here wasn't anywhere he recognized. He climbed back into his truck, his fingers trembling as they gripped the steering wheel. He needed to move. The truck's engine turned over reluctantly, coughing to life. The sound was a small comfort in the vast emptiness around him. Jake glanced at the dashboard clock. 3:17 a.m. That couldn't be right. He was sure hours had passed since the encounter on the highway. He checked his phone, but it was still dead. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered. Exhaustion was setting in, but fear kept him sharp. He shifted the truck into gear and started driving, hoping the road would reveal itself beyond the tall grass. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. The scenery didn't change. Jake felt like he was driving in circles, though he hadn't made a single turn. The stars above remained eerily static, as if the entire sky were frozen. Panic clawed at his mind. Was he trapped here? Then, as suddenly as it had disappeared, the road reappeared ahead of him. Jake slammed on the brakes, his heart leaping into his throat. The highway stretched out before him, illuminated by his headlights. But something was wrong. The asphalt was cracked and overgrown with weeds as though it hadn't been used in years. Jake hesitated, his foot hovering over the gas pedal. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, but there was nowhere else to go. Slowly, he eased the truck forward, the tires crunching over the uneven surface. The gas station appeared on the horizon, its neon sign flickering weakly. Relief flooded through Jake. Maybe he wasn't as lost as he thought, but as he pulled closer, his stomach twisted. The station looked abandoned. The windows were shattered, the pumps rusted and covered in graffiti. It was as if decades had passed since he was last here, though it had only been hours. Jake parked the truck and stepped out, his boots crunching on the cracked pavement. The air was thick with an unidentifiable smell, something metallic and acrid. He approached the station cautiously, peering through the shattered windows. Inside, the shelves were empty, and the floor was littered with debris. A layer of dust coated everything. A faint, rhythmic tapping broke the silence. Jake's pulse quickened. "Hello," he called out. The tapping stopped. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to leave, but his feet moved forward, drawn by an invisible force. He stepped through the broken doorway, the glass crunching under his boots. The air inside was colder, heavier. The tapping resumed, louder now, echoing through the space. He followed the sound to the back of the store, where a door hung ajar. Beyond it was a staircase leading down into darkness. Jake swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "This is a bad idea," he muttered, but his legs carried him down. The basement was dimly lit by a single, flickering bulb. The tapping was louder here, coming from the far corner of the room. Jake squinted, trying to make out the source. His blood ran cold. A figure sat hunched in the corner, its back to him. It was tapping something against the concrete floor, a metallic rod. The figure's movements were jerky, unnatural, as if it were a puppet controlled by invisible strings. "Hey!" Jake shouted. The figure froze. Slowly, it turned its head, revealing a pale, expressionless face. Its eyes were dark, empty voids. Jake stumbled back, his heart pounding. The figure stood, the metallic rod clattering to the floor. It took a step toward him, its movements unnervingly smooth. Jake turned and bolted up the stairs, his boots slipping on the dusty steps. He could hear the thing behind him, its footsteps unnaturally fast. He burst out of the gas station, lungs burning. The truck was still idling where he had left it. Jake dove into the cab, slamming the door shut. He glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the figure, but the doorway was empty. Jake didn't wait to find out if it was still following him. He slammed the truck into gear and tore down the highway. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The metallic object lay on the passenger seat, its surface faintly glowing again. The clock on the dashboard flickered, the numbers shifting erratically before settling on 5:42 a.m. Jake blinked, his mind struggling to make sense of it. He had lost over 2 hours, but he had no memory of what had happened during that time. His stomach churned. Whatever was happening to him wasn't over, not by a long shot. The highway stretched endlessly before him, the horizon bathed in the faint glow of dawn. Jake's mind raced with questions, but one thought stood out above the rest. He needed answers, and he had a feeling the object in his possession was the key. As the sun began to rise, the metallic object pulsed faintly, as if in response to his thoughts. Jake gritted his teeth and pressed down on the gas pedal. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't running anymore. It was time to find out the truth. By the time Jake reached the outskirts of a small desert town, the sky had shifted from pale orange to a deep indigo, the sun now a distant memory. He pulled into the gravel lot of an old diner, its neon sign flickering with the words, "Open 24 hours." The faint hum of life inside was a relief after the overwhelming solitude of the last several hours. Jake parked the truck, the metallic object still glowing faintly on the passenger seat. He shoved it into his jacket pocket, not wanting anyone to see it. The smell of frying bacon and stale coffee greeted him as he stepped inside. A waitress behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with a tired smile, looked up. "Rough night?" she asked, eyeing Jake's disheveled appearance. "You have no idea," he muttered, sliding onto a stool. "Coffee, please, black." The waitress nodded and poured him a cup. Jake wrapped his hands around it, letting the heat seep into his chilled fingers. As he sipped, he glanced at his reflection in the diner's window. That's when he noticed it, a faint circular mark on his forearm. He pushed up his sleeve, staring at the strange pattern etched into his skin. It was faintly iridescent, almost shimmering under the fluorescent lights. "What the hell?" Jake whispered, running his fingers over it. The skin felt smooth, unbroken, but the mark was unmistakable. "Everything okay?" the waitress asked, her brow furrowing. Jake quickly pulled his sleeve down. "Yeah, fine. Just tired." But he wasn't fine. The mark wasn't there before. He was certain of it. His mind raced as he finished his coffee. Whatever this mark was, it had to be connected to the object, and to whatever had happened during those missing hours. Jake left cash on the counter and headed for the restroom. Under the harsh fluorescent light, he examined the mark more closely. It was a perfect circle, surrounded by smaller, intricate symbols that seemed to shift and rearrange when he moved his arm. He felt a faint warmth emanating from it, as though it were alive. Panic set in. Jake splashed water on his face, his mind spinning. "What's happening to me?" he muttered, gripping the edges of the sink. His reflection stared back at him, but he barely recognized the man in the mirror. He looked older, worn, as if he'd aged years in a single night. As Jake stepped out of the restroom, he noticed a man sitting in a corner booth, staring at him. The man was dressed in a dark suit, his pale face emotionless. Jake froze. It was the same man from the gas station. Jake's heart pounded as he turned and headed for the door, but the man's voice stopped him. "Mr. Bennett." Jake hesitated, his hand on the door handle. He turned slowly, his eyes locking with the man's. "What do you want?" The man motioned for him to sit. "We need to talk." Reluctantly, Jake slid into the booth across from him. Up close, the man's face was unnervingly smooth, almost artificial. His eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to see straight through Jake. "You've been marked," the man said, his voice low and deliberate. Jake's stomach churned. "What does that mean?" "It means they've chosen you," the man replied, leaning forward. "The mark is a signal, a tracker. They're watching you." "Who's they?" Jake demanded, his voice rising. The man didn't answer. Instead, he slid a photograph across the table. Jake picked it up, his hands shaking. It showed a group of people standing in a field, each with the same circular mark on their forearms. But what sent a chill down Jake's spine was that none of them looked alive. Their eyes were hollow, their faces gaunt, as if the life had been drained out of them. Jake slammed the photo down. "What the hell is this?" "Your future, if you're not careful," the man said coldly. "You need to leave, now." "Leave? Go where?" "Somewhere they can't find you." The man's gaze flicked to Jake's jacket pocket. "And take that with you. It's the only thing keeping you alive." Jake's blood ran cold. "You mean the key?" The man nodded. "They'll come for it, and when they do, you'll wish you'd listened to me." Before Jake could respond, the man stood and walked out of the diner, disappearing into the night. Jake sat there, his mind racing. The mark on his arm itched, burning faintly. He clenched his fist, his jaw tightening. He didn't know who to trust, but one thing was clear: he couldn't stay here. Jake returned to his truck, his pulse hammering in his ears. As he started the engine, the CB radio crackled to life. A distorted voice filled the cab. "Jake Bennett, they're coming." Jake slammed the radio off and floored the gas pedal, speeding out of the parking lot. His hands gripped the wheel, his knuckles white. He glanced at the mark on his arm, glowing faintly in the dim light. It was a constant reminder that his life was no longer his own. As the town disappeared in his rearview mirror, Jake's mind churned with questions. Who were they? Why had they marked him? And what was the key's purpose? But one thought overpowered the rest. He was running out of time. Jake drove through the night, the glow of the metallic object casting eerie light over the truck's interior. The road stretched endlessly before him, illuminated only by his headlights. The voice on the radio still echoed in his mind. "They're coming." Every shadow felt alive, every flicker of movement a potential threat. As he sped down the highway, Jake glanced at the mark on his forearm. It pulsed faintly, matching the rhythm of his heartbeat. The symbols inside the mark shifted and rearranged when he moved, as though responding to him. Whatever this mark was, it wasn't natural. The CB radio crackled again. "Jake Bennett, you can't outrun them." Jake grabbed the microphone. "Who is this? What do you want from me?" The static grew louder, drowning out all sound. Suddenly, a pair of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. The vehicle closed in fast, its bright lights cutting through the darkness. It was a black SUV, identical to the one that had chased him earlier. "Damn it," Jake muttered, slamming his foot on the gas. The truck's engine roared, struggling to accelerate. The SUV stayed on his tail, its headlights blinding him. Jake swerved, trying to shake it, but the vehicle mirrored his every move. The SUV bumped the back of his truck, jolting the cab. Jake gritted his teeth, gripping the wheel tighter. He couldn't let them catch him. Ahead, the road split into 2 lanes. Without thinking, Jake veered left, his tires screeching on the sharp turn. The SUV followed, its engine growling like a predator closing in. Jake's eyes darted to the metallic object on the passenger seat. It glowed brighter now, almost too bright to look at. Desperate, he grabbed it. The moment his fingers touched the object, a wave of energy surged through him, and the truck's headlights flickered. The road ahead changed. Jake blinked, his heart pounding. The familiar asphalt had vanished, replaced by a narrow dirt path surrounded by dense woods. The SUV was gone. Jake glanced in the mirror, but there was no sign of it. Only darkness. "What the hell is going on?" he whispered. The metallic object in his hand pulsed. Jake slowed the truck, the tires crunching over the dirt. The woods were unnervingly quiet, the air thick with stillness. He stopped the truck and stepped out, holding the object tightly. The trees seemed to close in, their twisted forms casting long shadows. A sound broke the silence, a faint mechanical hum, coming from deep within the woods. Jake's pulse quickened. He turned toward the sound, the object in his hand glowing faintly. The hum grew louder, accompanied by a flickering light. Jake moved toward it. The light pulsed like a heartbeat, drawing him closer. The metallic object in his hand grew warmer, syncing with the distant light. The source of the light came into view, a massive metallic structure embedded in the ground. It looked like a spacecraft, its sleek surface glowing faintly with shifting symbols. The symbols matched those on Jake's arm, rearranging like living organisms. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He reached out, brushing the surface of the craft. It was cold, but the symbols reacted to his touch, flaring brightly before dimming. The hum grew louder, and a ramp extended to the ground, revealing a dark interior. A faint light emanated from within, casting an eerie glow over the clearing. Jake hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to run. The metallic object vibrated, urging him forward. Before he could move, a shadow appeared at the top of the ramp. Jake's breath hitched as the figure stepped into the light. It was tall and humanoid, its features alien, smooth metallic skin and large black eyes. The creature raised a hand, palm outstretched. Jake's arm burned where the mark was, the pain sharp and intense. He clutched it, his knees buckling. The creature tilted its head, studying him. Suddenly, the SUV burst into the clearing, its engine roaring. Jake barely had time to react as men in black suits poured out, armed with sleek weapons. "Get on the ground," one shouted, aiming his weapon. Jake froze, his mind racing. The creature didn't move, its gaze shifting between Jake and the men. The metallic object in Jake's hand grew unbearably hot. He dropped it, and the glow intensified, flooding the clearing with blinding light. Chaos erupted. The men fired energy bolts at the creature. It raised its hand, a shield of light deflecting the attacks. Jake scrambled backward, shielding his eyes. The metallic object pulsed one last time, emitting a deafening hum. The ground shook, and the light consumed everything. When Jake opened his eyes, he was alone. The clearing was empty. The spacecraft, the men, and the creature were gone. The metallic object lay at his feet, dark and silent. The mark on his arm burned faintly, a reminder that the nightmare wasn't over. Jake staggered to his truck, his legs trembling. He didn't know what had just happened, but he couldn't stop now. The answers he sought were still out there, and so were the dangers. As he drove away, the CB radio crackled to life. A voice, calm and cold, whispered, "It's only the beginning, Jake Bennett." Jake drove for hours, the metallic object lifeless on the passenger seat. His mind churned with questions, haunted by the voice on the CB radio. It's only the beginning. He felt trapped in a game without rules. unsure of where the road, or his fate, would lead. Exhaustion finally forced him to pull off the road onto a dirt path. Beneath the shadow of a rocky outcrop, Jake parked and let sleep claim him. For the first time in hours, his racing thoughts quieted. When he woke, the sun was high and sweat clung to his skin. Jake stretched, but his breath caught. Standing outside the truck was the creature from the woods, its metallic skin glinting in the sunlight. Jake's first instinct was to grab the metallic object, but it was gone. He searched frantically, his pulse racing. Turning back to the window, he froze. The creature raised a hand, palm outstretched in a gesture that seemed peaceful. Summoning courage, Jake stepped out of the truck. His legs trembled, but he faced the creature. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice shaking. The creature tilted its head. A sudden burning sensation shot through Jake's arm where the mark was. He winced, clutching it. But as he looked down, the symbols glowed and shifted into a new pattern. The pain subsided, replaced by an eerie clarity. "You have been chosen," a voice echoed, not aloud but directly in Jake's mind. It was calm, neither male nor female. "Chosen for what?" Jake demanded. "To be the bridge," the voice replied. "The key you carried is not a weapon, but a beacon. It connects your world and ours. We have watched your kind for centuries, waiting for the right moment to make contact. You are the one who will open the door." "Why me?" Jake asked, his voice breaking. "I didn't ask for this." "You were marked because you are capable. Your kind is at a crossroads. The decisions you make now will determine your survival." "Survival from what?" Jake shouted. "Who are you?" "We are the Watchers," the voice said. "We observe and guide but do not interfere. The mark on your arm connects you to us. The key was a test to prove your worth. Now, the true trial begins." Jake wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the creature's presence overwhelmed him. His instincts told him he couldn't fight this. "What happens now?" he asked softly. The creature raised its hand and the ground rumbled. Behind Jake, the rocky outcrop split open, revealing a glowing portal. The air shimmered, and Jake felt it pulling at him as though calling his name. "You must step through," the voice said. "On the other side, you will find answers. But be warned, once you cross, there is no return." Jake stared at the portal, his heart pounding. He wanted to run, but he knew this was his path. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. The mark on his arm burned brightly, its symbols aligning with those on the glowing portal. As Jake crossed the threshold, the world dissolved into light. The other side was beyond comprehension, a vast, shifting landscape of lights and shapes. Jake felt weightless, floating in a space that defied logic. Voices whispered all around him, speaking in an ancient, incomprehensible language. In the distance, a towering structure pulsed with light. Jake felt an irresistible pull toward it. As he approached, the whispers grew louder, urgent. At the base of the structure, Jake saw a panel embedded in its surface. The symbols on his arm matched those on the panel. He hesitated, then placed his hand on it. A surge of energy coursed through him as the structure lit up. The whispers became one voice, unified and clear. "You are the bridge," it said. "Through you, our worlds will unite. But unity comes at a cost." Jake's vision blurred and images flooded his mind. Cities burning, people fleeing, the black SUVs, the Watchers. He saw himself at the center, the key in his hand, his choices shaping the fate of both worlds. The voice softened. "Your journey is only beginning. The mark will guide you, but your choices will define your legacy. Choose wisely." The light faded, and Jake found himself back in his truck beneath the rocky outcrop. The mark on his arm still glowed faintly, but the metallic object was gone. The CB radio crackled, and the cold, familiar voice whispered, "We're watching, Jake." Jake stared at the horizon, the weight of his responsibility sinking in. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he wasn't running anymore. Starting the engine, Jake drove toward the rising sun, ready to face whatever came next.